Hey everybody, and welcome back to BK's Bullets. Today we're going to be talking about the Marvel Comics series Truth, Red, White, and Black. Hey everybody, and welcome back to BK's Bullets. As always, I am your host, Brent, and today we're going to be talking about the Marvel Comics series Truth, Red, White, and Black. This is the story of Isaiah Bradley. It's published in 2003. But before we get to do that, let me ask you to do one thing. Please subscribe. Helps me out, lets you know when I post new videos. Hit that bell if you want an instant notification, and it helps the channel grow. Thank you very much. Now, so I've heard about this story. I remember reading about it in Wizard magazine way back in the day. Again, we're talking 2002, 2003, so I was in high school at the time. And I never picked it up. I didn't know who Robert Morales was. Didn't know who Kyle Baker was until he did some Plastic Man stuff a little while later. And I've never read it since then. I know who the character of is it Elijah? I think it's Elijah, it's got to be. I think it's Elijah Bradley, who is Patriot in the Young Avengers. I'm looking towards my books over there. I've read those recently. The Young Avengers, the two books by Jim Chung and Alan Heinberg, those are really good. But I never read the story of Patriot's grandfather, which is Isaiah Bradley. Obviously, we have him in the Falcon and Winter Soldier TV show right now. He popped up in episode, I think it was 2, right? So we will see if that comes back around. You know, if they finish that thread later on in the series as one of the earlier Super Soldiers. So I was interested in this book. So it's hard to find a softcover trade paperback. It's hard to find a hardcover trade paperback. The hardcover was printed in 2009, I saw. So that's over 11 years ago or something like that, a long, long time. So it's probably out of print, and if you do find it, it's probably very expensive. They do have it on the Comixology app, which is where I got them. It's a 7-issue series, and I read it last night. I'm still in the midst of reading my Death of Captain America complete collection trade. I just found myself downstairs while my wife was watching TV and the kids were playing, and I was like, well, you know, I'll read this since I have my iPad right here. I didn't want to trudge back upstairs here to get my Captain America trade. So I started reading it, and I gotta say, this thing was not a pleasant read. Not because it's bad, but because the events in here are so shocking, so jarring, and so unpleasant, it makes for an unpleasant read. Now, all things aside, I'm a white man in 2021. I have not lived the experiences of many of the characters in this book, much less heard any stories like the characters in this book. There's a lot about history I don't know. So if I misspeak or make a generalization after this part, that's on me. I'm sorry. But let's dive in and talk about the book. So I thought this book was going to be the story about Isaiah, from him being a soldier in World War II to being this kind of black Captain America super soldier kind of thing. And that's not really the case at all. Really, Isaiah, you see him in the very first issue, and then he's in the other issues a little bit, but there's a group of black men that are black soldiers that are experimented on, and as that group whittles down, you get Isaiah becomes the center focus in the last 2 or 3 issues. So it's not really this one man's story, it's the story of like the experiment idea itself. I gotta say though, it is not only are the events depressing and unpleasant, I kind of found the art a little unpleasant to look at as well. So Kyle Baker is an accomplished cartoonist. If you look up Kyle Baker, you'll probably see the Plastic Man stuff. You might see some of this. The covers are striking, but the art inside is very rough, very cartoonish. I would say it's a more cartoonish version of Fraser Irving's art, if you've seen that. It's like almost like a very loose comic newspaper strip from that time period. So I don't know if Kyle Baker's trying to ape something, and it's very caricature-ic. Not characteristic, but caricature. That type of style. Everything is exaggerated. And it might be for a purpose there as well. All of the white characters are exaggerated. Some of them, the ugly white characters in terms of their personality, are very, very ugly to look at. And the idealistic white characters are very idealized. When we finally do see Steve Rogers in this book, he's super broad shoulders, he's like basically like a triangle with a square head and jaw built on top of him. The black characters are drawn very uncaricature-ic. They're not caricatures. They're more well realized and more realistic, even though there are cartoonish aspects to them. But it's more in the terms of realism and what this experiment does to their bodies after that, where they get exaggerated and things like that. So I don't know if it's Kyle Baker's intent to make a majority of these evil white men look bad and look like horrible and Quasimodo-ish. It might be. It's not very subliminal. I'm not trying to say it's offensive. It's just that it's hard to take in the story when the art is so in your face, right? And there's a lot to this story, to this book, that is very in your face on purpose. So again, white man reading a story about black men being experimented on. So the general gist is this. Captain America is created in the late 30s, early 40s. I don't know when the exact Marvel time period he's created. But then the U.S. government takes a group of black soldiers and experiments on them with that same serum or a variant of it to try and create more. So since one was successful, they're trying to create more. And it's not really explained why these other versions are unsuccessful. There's multitudes, basically they take 2 whole battalions of black soldiers in this fort in Alabama. They put half of them on trucks, and then the other, just to see how many they can pack in there like sardines, similar to the slave ships, I think, on purpose. The other half are then shot, we're presumed shot, because we see our characters in the trucks, like we're following 4 or 5 characters in the first couple of issues here. And they hear, there you go, do you hear gunshots? So we're presuming that the U.S. Army murdered a whole bunch of other black not civilians, but enlisted men in 1941 or something like that. And now all this is based on, if you go and read about the Tuskegee experiments, the only thing that I know about it is that the U.S. government experimented on black people and it was horrific. I don't know all the details. So if this is lining up with stuff that actually did happen, that's even worse that this is based in reality. I don't know if the government actually did this stuff. All I know is reading this version of this story was horrific. Anyway, so you have our group of black soldiers, our characters. Again, there's 4 or 5 of them here. You see them get injected with this serum, and some of them die. Some of them plump up and explode immediately. Some of them plump up and live a little bit longer and then die later on. There's increased aggression. It increases their muscle mass, all this kind of stuff. It's very horrific. And then there's a group later on. They send them to Europe to go execute this mission. I guess Captain America was supposed to join them. He never actually does. And there's a conflict, and then basically the other soldiers are dead, and only Isaiah is left, and he steals the uniform meant for Steve Rogers and goes and puts it on and goes and carries out this mission at this German death camp, where the Germans are also trying to create super soldiers and things like that. So he's trying to stop the Germans from doing to the Jews or whoever they're experimenting on what the U.S. government did to these black people. And then it's in the last issue where they kind of really explain what was shown or talked about in the Captain America Winter Soldier episode number 2, where he comes back from the war, is sent to jail for stealing Captain America's uniform. Are you fucking kidding me? It was ridiculous. Horrifically unfair. And then experimented upon while he's in jail. Eventually gets pardoned and left out, seems like in the 60s or something like that. So this guy was in jail for 20 years. But the serum leaves him kind of brain dead. Not brain dead, but basically like a toddler level intellect is how it's described. And it's the same way that he is in the Young Avengers series, is basically how we leave him here. So again, very depressing, very horrific story. Makes me want to learn more about our history and the Tuskegee experiments to see how truly bad it was. Because if it was on this level or worse, that's awful. It's awful that the government did this to people in general, not just particularly black Americans. The Japanese internment camps in World War II are fucking awful for our history. For the country that prides itself on being the best, we certainly have a lot to be ashamed of. Slavery notwithstanding. Throw that in there as well. All the Asian hate and stuff that's been going on now. The anti-Black Lives Matter protests. Black lives do matter. And if you don't agree with that statement, read this book. It's awful. People should be treated as people. They're not animals. But anyway, again, Truth, Red, White, and Black, a very unpleasant read. To be honest, I am surprised that Marvel published this story as is at all. Not because I disagree with the idea of a black Captain America or the idea of the government experimenting on black characters in the Marvel Universe the same way the Tuskegee experiments happened in real life. I think there are parallels you can draw there, and that is an inspired idea for a story, however horrific it is. I'm surprised Marvel published it because it is so dark. Because you have the government shooting its own officers and much less massacring half of the black soldiers of the 2 platoons they gathered to push onto trucks. And to show these other awful, how these experiments, not how they happened, but what it did to them. I'm surprised. It's hardcore. It is gruesome. It is very adult. So this is not a story for children, that's for sure. Looking at the single issues here, it doesn't say Marvel Max, or anything like that. It doesn't say mature readers on the cover at all. So it's kind of an unblemished look, an unblemished version of history, at least of the Marvel Universe, for them, how it seems to me they want to present their Marvel Universe history or whatever. So I'm surprised it got published at all. Certainly there are other books you can go read that are similar to this, I'm trying to remember the names, Kwanzaa Olefo, sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, but go follow Jamal Eigel on Twitter. He's a friend of the Comic Timing podcast that I do. And or look him up on Facebook, however you can find him. But basically, look up his work. He's done this series called Black, and it was about how it's basically superheroes in a world where the only superheroes are black people, and everything else is kind of the same. So, there's police brutality and protests and stuff like that. There's a sequel coming out, I think, later this year called White that I'm interested to read. It's basically, so it's along the same racial superhero lines that this is in. Although Jamal's art is so pretty that the gruesome events that happen in that book that he did, White, are less in your face because his art is so beautiful to look at. Whereas this, the art is so jarring and in your face that when these awful things happen, it's even more awful to look at because there's some other points you're not sure about what happened. I gotta say, as horrible as the story is to read, the events, it is a nice... would I recommend it to people? I don't know. I don't really know. It certainly doesn't read like it's a modern classic or anything like that. It's certainly an aspect of something that even Marvel hasn't really picked up upon. Maybe they will now that the MCU seems to be dipping its toe into this idea. We'll see how far the MCU goes with it if that story gets told later on. But I actually, actually reading the story too, I gotta say, maybe Robert Morales, the writer, didn't do a good enough job telling the story. Because there were times when I read it, I was like, is that what happened? Is this what happened? And then I got to the next issue and read the recap page. And the recap page actually does a little bit better of telling you what happened in the events of last issue than reading the issue did. Now, that's because maybe there's a lack of narrative captions or a lack of dialogue. So, when Isaiah gets to the German camp, it has his hands around the throat of this guy and he's basically killing this German doctor. I think it was the doctor who was leading these experiments. It's not spelled out explicitly or even implicitly. It's just, one panel of him bursting into a room, the next panel of him choking out this German guy. And then in the recap page it says, yeah, he killed the German Dr. Koch or something like that. And I was like, oh, okay, so that's why I thought it happened. But why isn't that more prevalent in the book? Maybe it's not important. Maybe what they really want you to take away from is the idea that the U.S. government's treated black people as, not people for a long, long time. I don't know. It's a very political book, and especially nowadays, like reading it in the current climate as the Derek Chauvin trial is going on. We don't have a verdict yet at this time of the recording, but so a lot of things are prevalent going on in the mind in the society, and to read a book like this where it's very in your face, it's a very political book. So if you're interested in where the Isaiah story comes from, I would say read it. As it stands on its own, I don't know that I could really recommend it. It's not a fun comic book. It's not like Winter Soldier or Red Menace that we've been talking about in weeks previous. It's not like Fallen Sun, where I really enjoyed rereading that, or Civil War, where it's just a slam bang superhero action fest. Maybe it's too much compared to those others. Too much in terms of horrificness or realism. But at the same time, the art is there, and their lack of explicit storytelling is there, that I don't think I really had that good of a time reading it. If I had to go to the recap page to have something spelled out for me, did the story really do it? Although, again, is that really what the story's about? I will leave it up to you to decide. So that's my thoughts on Truth, Red, White, and Black. You can go find it on Comixology or your local comic shop, see if Amazon's got a copy, or eBay it if you're interested in reading it. But I'm certainly more interested to go and look up the Tuskegee experiments now and learn about what really happened than I was before. So if there's any good that comes out of it, it's making me want to learn about our horrific history and how we denigrated people who deserve respect. So there you go. Kind of a morose BK's Bullets today, but I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like. Let me know down below what you thought of Truth, Red, White, and Black if you've read it. And I will see you guys next time in the Funny Pages.